Riding off the success of 2 episodes that were refreshingly good, brings us to Pyramid at the end of this shit. An episode I refuse to call by name except for the title of this individual review, in case I ever try to monetize my videos. Even though every single one of them ever would probably get demonetized anyway, but whatever. And right off the bat, as I've no doubt said before in these reviews, I am not at all looking forward to reviewing this one. Because this is yet another episode that I've just never liked. And for once, with Series 10, I'm actually in the majority. The best I've seen this episode rated, even by Series 10 shills, is just fine.
That's not good enough!
I need more! And this episode is being written by fucking Peter Harness and Stephen Moffat, which is already a recipe for disaster. I know I said in my Series 10 ranking that I find it really annoying that Moffat started this trilogy so strong, only to half-arse it with this episode, and then throw the whole thing on Toby Whithouse. And that half-arsing is what we're going to be covering today. I wonder how much there is I can possibly say about the first 35 minutes of this episode. Let's hope there's a shitload of contrivances, but it's Moffat, so it wouldn't surprise us, to be honest. So we start in a recap showing some of the events of Extremis, which naturally fade into a showcase of real life, showing Bill and Penny on a date. And this shit to me is still hilarious, not because of the scene itself, because like in Extremis, the scenes between these two are actually nice. While extremely brief, they have great chemistry. Better chemistry than we saw with the piss puddle bitch, yet which one is the Deus Ex Machina for Series 10? We're almost there.
Maybe he's just trying to keep you on the straight and narrow.
Maybe, yeah. How do you feel on the subject?
What a strange little interaction. I don't know what it is, maybe I just haven't met enough lesbians or bisexuals, but is it just me? Or did that line just sound really weird? Or maybe I'm homophobic, I'll let Twitter decide, that usually goes down well. So some soldiers break into Bill's flat and hold the two at gunpoint for some reason. And the general of the UN enters the room.
How would I know the president? I mean, I wouldn't have even voted for him. He's orange.
Well, at least it wasn't an orange man bad, but still, that line has aged horribly. Peter Harness already mishandling political themes.
I'm beginning to see a pattern here that I'm not so sure if I like.
What's he president of?
Well, us.
Not again! Also, this scene literally confirmed one of my biggest issues with this idea that I said in my Death in Heaven review. Because if the Doctor was the president of Earth, that would imply that every country in the world, or at least every ruler of every country in the world, knows who the Doctor is and agreed that he would be in this position, with no confliction. What? So both the Chinese, the Russian, and the Americans all team up to go against the monks in this story. Now, not to get political here, but what the hell is... I had to say it. Now, not to get political here, but I have a sneaking suspicion that these 3 countries, especially the ruler of these 3 countries, wouldn't exactly get along, especially in 2017. And surprisingly, in this story, written by a writer infamous for handling political themes poorly, the 3 military officers from each country do not conflict at all in this story. Now, even as someone with knowledge as limited on politics as it gets, even I know that that is bullshit. Especially doesn't help this episode's case that in early 2020, World War III almost started. Besides this episode's unfortunate extreme simplicity, I must say that the idea of a 5,000-year-old shit appearing in the middle of nowhere is a pretty interesting idea. I hope this part of the story does enough with this. No, that was serious, I can't remember. So the annoyingly blue titles roll and we get a scene establishing one of the characters we see littered through the story while the Doctor gives a speech about death and how every step you take moves you closer. While I don't think this speech works as well as the one at the beginning of Oxygen, it's still pretty great, as it puts us in the mindset of the Doctor, who is still struggling immensely with his blindness. However, right off the bat with his blindness, it feels like far less of a struggle for him in this story, because look at how much he can see with the sonic sunglasses. As long as he's a fan of The Matrix, I imagine it's pretty easy to live like this. And I also find it pretty weird how it shows him all building things around him, but not people. Even though things like X-rays exist and can probably look through life forms. Why couldn't he just have some technology like that in the glasses? Because even if everyone looked like a spooky, scary skeleton, it's better than not being able to see them at all. And all of that comes into fruition of this episode unfortunately being Capaldi's worst blind performance. And the presentation of this episode isn't helping either. Because besides one brilliant scene in this episode later, this episode doesn't really do much with this super interesting concept. And to be honest, it's kind of just been a letdown since Oxygen itself, which definitely used this story beat the most effectively. Because he actually couldn't see at all and was obviously very limited. In Extremis, while it was just a really good simulation, he wasn't as limited, as he could still see some things in the story and even temporarily cured his vision, even if it almost killed him and didn't work as well. Though I feel like that moment working so effectively is more so down to Capaldi's acting rather than the writing. I forgot to mention that in my Extremis review because I was really distracted by finally having a good Moffat written episode. But in this one, it's even less of a detriment than it was before. Besides one scene, it doesn't really affect him that much. Even in Extremis they show Nardole helping him excessively, but this time there's very little of any of it, besides Bill's suspicions and worries about the Doctor growing throughout the story. So we cut to the research centre, which comes into play massively in the episode, and we meet Brian from My Parents Are Aliens. Only real OGs know that one.
Whoa.
Who is criminally underused in this episode, by the way. And Warwick Davis.
Do we have a jack? I think we can use... Warwick, you can lift things, right? I don't know what superpowers you people have, but can you lift it?
You just referred to me as a jack.
He's the only dwarf I know. I couldn't think of a better joke. So we find out the shit is in fucking Turkmenistan, which just kills the stakes of this story highly. Because this shit is in the middle of nowhere and is currently affecting no one. If it was an important location, that might have made this episode seem more interesting, like how Live the Land has it directly in the middle of London. But when it's here, it just comes off as dull. And trust me, this episode doesn't need any more dullness. I mean, they tried to excuse this by having the Doctor say that it chose to come here because it's a strategic intersection between all three of the most powerful countries. But considering we know how powerful the monks are, why did they not just put one in each country? It's almost as if in these three stories they seem like three completely different villains each time. Because the last fucking episode established they can make a simulation that is that good that it can fully replicate the Doctor, the sonic sunglasses, and the TARDIS. And the only reason they lost in that story was because of how good their own technology was. So why don't they prove that to the rest of the world by putting three huge fuck-off shits in three of the most powerful countries in the world, and then force them to work together reluctantly? Probably what would happen in real life. But nah, it's just a fictional desert location in the middle of nowhere. How interesting.
We know you.
Then you'll know that there is a line on the sand.
So the Doctor walks up to the shit, and a monk leaves it and tells the Doctor that they will rule the world only when asked, which is very strange and doesn't add up. In Extremis, the whole point of the monks building that extremely effective simulation was to properly prepare invading Earth, and they claim to have killed the Doctor many times.
We have killed you many times.
Then what are you waiting for? Why don't you kill me now?
If that's the case, then why don't you just kill him now? They know how competent he is, even while he's blind. Dispose of him as quickly as possible to help you win.
She seems to know what she's doing. The first thing I'd do if I wanted to invade the world would be to kill you.
Thanks.
And in no part of Extremis was this weird poo plan showing. Why did they decide to do that? How the fuck is this the best course of action to take? I'm beginning to sense a pattern of shit not adding up here. So the monks then activate the Doomsday Clock, which is actually a good concept for the story to dabble with, and I like the fact that the Doctor even says it was invented by some atomic scientists in 1947, because this foreshadows to us the reason that this global catastrophe would happen at an atomic scale. and this episode's threat of global destruction is that of an airborne death that could potentially wipe out millions. If anyone could actually remember this episode, I'm sure it would have been memed to shit for the monks trying to start COVID-19. Because given that I'm currently writing this in 2021, that's all I can think of right now. So we get another scene of Brian being hungover on the job, and here, I've got to say, I find the reason that this global disaster could happen to be very interesting, but like with most good ideas in the Moffat era, I feel like it's built on contrivance. Because, for some reason, he came into work hungover as shit, and considering what his line of work is, that is incredibly fucking risky. I mean, I work a pretty low maintenance job, and even I wouldn't go in fucking hungover because my performance on the job would be much worse and I could potentially lose it if I poorly perform. And besides him being out drinking the night before, there's nothing really that establishes this character as being irresponsible or even stupid. And this could have been prevented if there was just a line like, yeah, I wasn't really going to come in today, but I'm a bit behind on the mortgage, so I need all the money I can get at the moment. Just a tiny little shitty exposition line like that could have helped this episode so much, because without it, this just seems like another standard Moffat era moment, where things just sort of happen, because the story writers want them to happen, but they don't really think on how to get there in a logical way, so they just write the characters as fucking idiots. Man, I can't wait till Russell gets back so I can review and watch good Doctor Who again. The first episode of Series 13 aired the night before I'm writing this, and it was fucking awful. Follow my Instagram or Twitter if you want to know more on my thoughts on that. Because also at the time of this being recorded, there is 4 episodes of Flux out, and... wait, is there 4 or 3? I think there's 4. Whichever one has the Weeping Angels in, and Kevin McNally was actually, like, good. Like, 5 or 6 out of 10 at best, but like, you know how rare that is in this era? Kevin McNally fucking stole the show. So the Doctor lands on some poor Russian man and the CEOs of each country meet up to talk about the monks. I do like how the Doctor does seem more vulnerable in this story, because usually he's against the whole start a war thing, especially in the last episode written by Peter Harness, but this time around, he doesn't even question it, and encourages it in fact, which I find interesting. However, like I explained before, because of the 12th Doctor's extreme inconsistency and erratic behaviour, this moment doesn't work as effective as it probably should have. So Bill thinks that the Doctor is the imposter, so she goes over to him and he starts explaining how he's blind by talking about fear, before he's interrupted by a shitty scene of the monks, and this one's just... ugh! One of the many shitty laser effects in Series 10. So the monks somehow replace all of the pilots and the pyramid brings the plane to the ground. And then they say they're ready to talk, and they weren't ready to talk before. Why? I get that this is supposed to establish the monks' power and threat, but in case you somehow forgot, we just had an entire story doing that already! You know how in the Series 3 finale, the very end of Utopia establishes the threat, then Sound of Drums shows the power of the threat, and then Last of the Time Lord shows the aftermath of this said sexy threat, and how it's affecting the world? Considering that Extremis had fully established the threat and shown the power of the threat at this point, I honestly just have to question the existence of this story. Seriously, imagine how much more impactful it would have been had we seen Extremis and then instantly gone to Live the Land. That would have been enough to tell us how powerful these creatures are, since we already fucking know because we spent 3/4 of an hour being shown how powerful they are. That would be the equivalent if, between the first and second part of The End of Time, we got a story showing the billions of masters dicking around and not doing anything relevant to the grand story. That's pretty much what this is. Shit. Shut up, bro. I'm awake. That's pretty much what this is, because as I've already said twice before, we just had a story establishing the monks and showing their power. This episode is completely unnecessary filler. If you really wanted to make this story a trilogy, then have an episode set during Live the Land that shows how Bill and Nardole are struggling to survive on their own, and the Doctor being kidnapped, and having to act evil for a story. That would not only make Live the Land feel more fleshed out with its billions of ideas that don't get fleshed out, but it could also show off how the monks are so effective for being able to integrate themselves so naturally and brilliantly. Because, as is, what they've currently done is set up a brilliant simulation of them taking over Earth, and then, when push comes to shove, they've set up a pyramid in the middle of nowhere and dicked around for 45 minutes waiting for consent. But why? You already know the perfect way to invade, you cripplingly dumb density bitch. So they enter the feces and the monks reveal that they can detect whatever catastrophe is going to happen and stop it. And they'll do it as long as they are asked to. Didn't stop Hellbent. And in concept, I don't really have a problem with this. And honestly, as much as this episode feels like a time waster, this is an interesting idea, but the nitty-gritty of this just make you scratch your head. Right off the bat, the monks say they made their appearance look like humans so they could fit in more naturally, and a soldier man naturally points out that they look like corpses. And they respond with, "You look like corpses to us." Which is a good line, but it's not exactly going to be one that makes people trust you now, is it? So there's currently a disaster that's going on, and the monks say that no one can stop it. Why doesn't the Doctor just immediately say that he can stop it? Because he can stop it, and he has hundreds upon hundreds of times. The monks show off a potential future to everybody there, and they all just believe it at face value. Bunch of friggin' idiots, man. Such friggin' idiots that the Secretary General of the UN gets himself killed because of it.
Well, it's been done before. Guess what happened? Me.
If you'd done this sooner, you could have just saved that man's life and have it prevented sooner, you dipshit. And then we cut back to Brian being an idiot and taking his helmet off in a toxic place. So of course the fucker dies not long after. I'm so glad that this man works in a place as important as this, but I work somewhere that pays minimum wage. I work 10 times as hard as you, Brian, you fucker. So 3 of the most powerful people ever come to work together after no confliction whatsoever, because that would have been interesting, and the Doctor starts deducting on where they could find the reason the world is ending. And he does it in a satisfying way, and the scene was going pretty well until he puts all of the top secret intelligent documents on fucking Google. Why the fuck would you do that, you moron? Even if the world is ending, this is such an irresponsible thing to do. Seriously, if he wins in the end, are we really expected to believe that he could get rid of all of that shit? As if there's not tons of people who would take advantage of that as well. You ever heard of the snipping tool, you fucking dumbass? Also, Brian died, not only because he didn't put his helmet back on, but also because he didn't think to close the fucking door when he ran out with the toxic sample. Actual fucking thick-headed nonce. So the officers start getting impatient, and the Doctor starts narrowing it down with Nardole while he's arguing to them. And they, one after each other, just decide to be fucking morons. Like, did not one of these fucking delinquent morons notice that the Doctor managed to narrow it down from 100,000 to 428 in 15 fucking seconds, and he's clearly trusted by people with more power than you because he's elected as the president of fucking Earth. And these fuckers, well, it couldn't be more obvious that they have some sort of ulterior motive, considering they literally said to rule through fear is inefficient. Did no one think that that sounded suspicious at all, considering they were just meant to be talking about saving people? What ruling would be involved in saving people? Oh my god. So the Doctor then goes to tell Bill he's blind again, and this time cuts himself off when he realizes he can blind the monks. And finally, after 32 fucking minutes, this episode finally picks up the pace and gets a move on with the very few bits of interesting shit sprinkled throughout.
Q, can you hack them?
Of course I can. I'm not just sexy.
Man, we have not had enough of Nardole in this episode, man. So Nardole turns off the cameras and the monks turn them back on. This was actually a very clever thing for the Doctor to do, using the monks' intelligence and power against them like how he did at Extremis. Unfortunately though, after some funny lines between the Doctor and Nardole, we get the biggest bit of contrivance that this episode has.
Back to the TARDIS, this place is toxic.
I'm not human.
Well, you're human enough. I got your lungs cheap.
Are you fucking kidding me? Why the fuck? I repeat, why the fuck would the Doctor give Nardole lungs if he isn't even human? Why would you do that? He wouldn't even need them. The fucker is a robot! That's like the fourth Doctor giving K9 a human heart. Can you think of any ways how giving K9 a human heart would be a detriment? Now let's apply this to Nardole. Could you think of any ways how giving a robot a heart would be a detriment? Because I can think of a few. In fact, I can think of one right fucking now, you idiot! Because of this massive, stupid contrivance of the Doctor, for some reason given the robot lungs, he gets trapped, and the monks get their power. Fucking fantastic. Fucking fantastic. Fucking fantastic! More of this era insisting that the Doctor is a fucking idiot. Great! Thanks! Didn't need any more, but thanks anyway! You know how this whole contrived situation could have been avoided? If you hadn't wrote this fucking story in the fucking first place, you fucking The idea I said earlier about showing Bill and Nardole's struggle is so much more interesting than any of the shit in this episode. I honestly have no idea why it was written this way. Why? Did any of the writers who made this story have any contact with each other whatsoever? So it turns out the air gets filtered every 30 minutes, so the monks push the doomsday clock forward again to scare the officers into the poo-poo. So the Doctor decides he'll blow up the lab to kill it. Honestly wish that this plan worked so that Live the Land just didn't exist, but unfortunately it doesn't. So the impure fuckers die, and the Doctor sets the bomb for 2 minutes and starts finna heading out, until it's revealed that he can't, because he can't see the numbers on the lock, and this moment is actually extremely well done. Because this is the biggest detriment to the Doctor, because of his blindness, since he himself went blind. Shame it's built on massive contrivances, but most of the good shit in this era is, unfortunately. Even Heaven Sent, one of the best 12th Doctor episodes ever, entirely happens because of a contrivance. Also, before I start praising this scene, isn't it funny that as soon as they landed, the Doctor didn't think to give Nardole a spacesuit so that he could help him breathe? So he could, you know, help? Wait a minute, that's not funny. The second the Doctor says to Bill he's blind and he's sorry, you can tell that Moffat took over because the dialogue flows so much more naturally and Bill actually feels like a character again. Because her and Nardole have been sidelined this entire story and neither of them have contributed anything interesting or, in fact, anything really to the plot at all. I like that Bill's kindness and love for the Doctor, something that has been built up since episode 1, showing her go out of her way to get gifts, actually does have some payoff by showing her make this huge risky decision just to save his life, and it is brilliant. See? I told you in the pilot review I wasn't being facetious when I complimented the scene, I just couldn't remember. And now I've seen it again, I can remember. Good little setup and payoff. Unfortunately though, the next episode pays off the mum arc, which is pain-inducing to say the least, and character damaging to say the most. But I must say, more than usual, Murray's score in these last couple of minutes has been fucking wonderful, playing up the hopefulness yet dread and despair at the same time. Two polar opposite emotions achieved at the same time. How does he even do it? No one knows, man. He's Murray Gold. Russell, please bring him back.
Tell you what, old man. You better get my planet back.
Why did that sound like Clara? Ugh. So, that was poo at the end of the shit, and my, what an absolute disappointment that episode was. Seriously, I've probably spent an extra 4 fucking hours on this review straight, purely because it's such a hard episode to review because it's just such a bunch of nothingness. For real, this one has been a struggle to review. Unless I'm looking at how badly it connects to either Extremis or Live the Land, this episode just feels like a big waste of time, because it was not needed at all. All that was established in this episode could have been established in Lie of the Land, and or a story that actually links to that one more naturally, because this story is the equivalent of adding an extra part of running around through corridors to a Classic Who episode, so pretty much every Classic Who episode. That's what this episode ends up feeling like in the grand scheme of things. Because of how poorly this trilogy of episodes has been set out, the absolute downgrade in quality this episode was after Oxygen and Extremis as well just makes it more apparent how abhorrent this episode is. The dialogue becomes all of a sudden a lot more boring and clunky and expositional, unless Moffat pops in, which makes the episode feel like it's going for two different tones at once. All of the character drama in this one feels very empty and hollow, because of how underdeveloped all of the characters are. Even our main leads in this one, usually the ones carrying the mediocre plots, are written in such a boring way for most of this story, it makes it feel near impossible to get invested. Like, Capaldi is still doing his blind acting, and he's fantastic, but for most of the story he doesn't get to do anything interesting, outside of tell Bill he's blind, which is only in 3 scenes and only the last one is really good. Besides that, he's pretty much just kind of the same. Bill is written to be nothing but exposition in the episode once again, and more with shit episodes it reminds me of why I used to think she was such a boring fucking companion in the first place. Fucking episodes like this, where she just doesn't do anything outside of like 1 or 2 scenes. Even Nardole doesn't have as many jokes that land in this one, and he's just used as exposition. It is written out of the story in one of the worst contrivances ever. And that's another reason this episode just fucking sucks so much. So much of what happens in it is just built on huge contrivances. It drives us up the fucking bend, making this probably one of the biggest downgrades to a 3-parter ever, and one of the many reasons why this series is so fucking bad. Up next is Lie of the Moffat. I'm calling it that because Moffat lied to us when he said Toby Whithouse was writing an episode, because this isn't written by Toby Whithouse. I don't even know if Moffat ever said that, I'm just saying he did because funny. Okay, bye. So Bill thinks the Doctor's the imposter, so she goes over to him and starts and he's oh, I have my gain turned up. This review might be louder than usual because I have my gain turned up for once, which might sound better, might sound worse, I don't know.